Counselor, I suggest you find admissible evidence, or withdraw your complaint. The courtroom went still. Imani Presswood stood at the plaintiff's table, fingers pressed flat against the wood. The judge's voice carried that particular tone she'd heard before. Not anger, not frustration, but something worse. Dismissal. The kind that said her presence was a formality he intended to end quickly. Judge Roland Beckham didn't look at her. He looked through her, the way people do when they've already decided you don't matter. She had paid $2.3 million to put him on that bench, and he didn't even remember her face. This wasn't a dismissal. It was a miscalculation. Imani opened her notebook. Her pen moved across the page, pressing hard enough that the ink bled through to the next sheet. She wrote down every word. The denial. The case number. The timestamp on the courtroom clock. 10:47 a.m., March 14th. She wrote down the way Beckham's clerk smirked from his desk. The way the defense attorney, Miranda Voss, didn't bother hiding her smile. Your Honor. Wesley Odom, her attorney, stood slowly. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his briefcase overstuffed with files from the 40 other cases he was juggling. The body cam footage was authenticated by the police department's own IT specialist. The chain of custody documentation is complete. I have the certification right here, which you failed to submit within the discovery deadline. Beckham shuffled papers without looking up. Motion denied. The footage is inadmissible. The deadline was extended by this court's own order. Are you arguing with my ruling, Counselor? Wesley's jaw tightened. Imani watched him calculate, push back and risk sanctions, or fold and hope for appeal. She knew which one he'd choose before he said it. No, Your Honor. Good. Beckham finally glanced in Imani's direction, not at her face, at some point past her shoulder. Ms. Presswood, I strongly advise you to consider settlement. This court has limited patience for cases built on speculation and grievance. Speculation. Grievance. She'd heard those words in 3 different courtrooms now, always directed at the same kind of plaintiff. Always from judges who never seemed to find similar defects in cases filed by certain developers, certain property management companies, certain people who looked nothing like her. Imani didn't respond. She finished writing, closed her notebook, and stood. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks for the next motion hearing. Beckham struck his gavel once. Court adjourned. The gallery emptied. Miranda Voss gathered her files with the leisurely pace of someone who'd already won. She paused at the plaintiff's table on her way out. Ms. Presswood. The smile was professional, perfected. My client remains open to a reasonable settlement. Say, $5,000 and a mutual release. You walk away, no harm done. I'll discuss it with my counsel. Of course you will. Miranda's heels clicked against the marble floor as she left. Wesley waited until the door closed before exhaling. I'm sorry. He rubbed his eyes. I knew Beckham was difficult, but that was targeted. He didn't even let me finish a sentence. How many cases has he handled like this? I told you, 3 that I know of. All housing discrimination, all black plaintiffs, all dismissed or ruled against. 3 that you know of. Imani tucked her notebook into her bag. Find me the rest. Wesley stared at her. Imani, I'm one lawyer with 40 cases. I don't have the resources to... I'll handle the resources. You handle the FOIA requests. FOIA requests for court records? That's not how... For the clerk's office, case assignments, statistical breakdowns, any internal communications about docket management. She pulled on her coat. There's a pattern here, Wesley. I intend to find it. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Something in her voice, not anger, something colder, made him reconsider. Who are you, Imani? She looked at him for a long moment. I'm your client. That's all you need to know. She walked out of the courthouse into gray March light. Her Honda Civic sat in the far corner of the lot, parked between a BMW and a Mercedes, both belonging to attorneys who charged more per hour than Wesley made in a day. She'd chosen the Civic deliberately. The the same way she'd chosen the apartment in Maplewood Heights, the same way she'd chosen to file this lawsuit as Imani Presswood, private citizen, rather than as what she actually was. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Withdraw. Final warning. She deleted it without reading twice. 14 months ago, she'd walked into a fundraiser at the Piedmont Country Club. Black dress, understated jewelry, the kind of quiet wealth that made people lean in rather than step back. She'd written a check that night, not from her personal account, but through Maple Grove Holdings LLC, a Delaware entity whose beneficial owner was buried under 3 layers of corporate structure. $2.3 million to Citizens for Fair Courts PAC. Roland Beckham had shaken her hand, looked her in the eye, and promised that friends of the campaign would always find fair treatment in his courtroom. She wondered if he'd remember that promise when she reminded him. But not yet. Not until she had everything she needed. Imani started the Civic and drove back to Maplewood Heights, to the 1-bedroom apartment where her neighbors thought she was a schoolteacher, to the life she'd built specifically for this moment. The waiting was the hardest part, but she was very, very good at waiting. 14 months earlier. The apartment at Maplewood Heights cost $1,100 a month, utilities included. Imani had chosen it for 3 reasons: proximity to the courthouse, a landlord with a documented history of code violations, and a tenant population that was 87% black. She'd learned about Galloway property management the way she learned about most things, through patterns in data. Her real estate investment firm tracked housing discrimination complaints across 12 states, flagging properties with statistical anomalies in eviction rates, code enforcement, and lease terminations. Maplewood Heights had appeared on the radar 18 months ago, a cluster of complaints that never quite made it to court. The complaints all told the same story. Black tenants received surprise inspections. White tenants did not. Black tenants were cited for minor violations: a window AC unit, a welcome mat in the hallway, a child's bicycle on the balcony. White tenants with identical violations were never cited. Black tenants who complained found their leases mysteriously non-renewed. White tenants who complained received maintenance visits within 48 hours. Imani could have bought the building. She could have bought the entire property management company. Instead, she rented Unit 4C, furnished it with second-hand furniture, and waited. It took 3 weeks for the first knock. "Ms. Presswood?" The man at her door was white, mid-40s, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. His polo shirt had the Galloway Property Management logo stitched over the breast pocket. "Trent Galloway. I'm the building manager. Just wanted to stop by, introduce myself, make sure you're settling in okay." "I am, thank you." He didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe, eyes moving past her into the apartment. "Nice place you've got here. You keeping it clean?" "Excuse me?" "Just asking." The smile widened. "We've had some issues with tenants not maintaining their units. Roaches, mold, that kind of thing. Lease is very clear about cleanliness standards." "My unit is clean, Mr. Galloway." "I'm sure it is. Mind if I take a quick look? Just a routine walkthrough." Imani felt her heartbeat slow. This was it, the first test. "Do you have written notice of an inspection?" Trent's smile flickered. "This isn't an official inspection, just a friendly visit." Georgia Code Section 44734 requires landlords to provide reasonable notice before entering a tenant's unit for non-emergency purposes. 24 hours, in writing. "Do you have that notice?" The smile disappeared entirely. "Lady, I'm just trying to do my job. And I'm just asking a question." Imani kept her voice level. "Do you have written notice?" Trent stared at her. She watched him calculate, push back, or retreat and regroup. Men like Trent always retreated when confronted with someone who knew the rules. They preferred targets who didn't. "I'll send you something official." He stepped back from the doorframe. "Have a nice day, Ms. Presswood." He walked away. Imani closed the door, locked it, and pulled out her phone to dictate a memo. March 3rd, 2:47 p.m. First contact with Trent Galloway. Attempted warrantless entry. No written notice provided. Cited Georgia Code 44734. Subject retreated. Begin documentation protocol. She saved the memo to a cloud folder labeled Maplewood, Evidence. Then she sat down at her kitchen table, opened her laptop, and checked the dashboard for her 4 LLCs. Total assets under management, $47 million. Most of it in commercial real estate across the Southeast, carefully structured to avoid any public connection to her name. She scrolled to a line item from October 2022. Citizens for Fair Courts PAC. Wire transfer, $2,300,000. Roland Beckham had won his judgeship by 6,000 votes. The PAC's ad campaign, funded almost entirely by her money, had run for 3 weeks straight in the final month before the election. A judge who believes in fairness. A judge who listens. Roland Beckham for Superior Court. She'd met him once, at the fundraiser. He'd been charming, attentive, the kind of politician who made you feel like the only person in the room. He'd promised that his courtroom would be different, that people who supported his campaign would find a fair hearing. She'd recorded the conversation. Now she wanted to see if the promise meant anything. The first step was getting into his courtroom. The second step was documenting exactly how he treated a black woman with no apparent wealth, no apparent connections, no apparent power. The third step would come later. Imani closed the laptop and looked around her $1,100 apartment. Small kitchen, smaller bathroom, a bedroom barely large enough for a double bed. Nothing like the penthouse in Buckhead where she usually lived, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Atlanta skyline. But this was the life she needed to live now. At least until Roland Beckham gave her enough rope to hang himself with. She had a feeling it wouldn't take long. The second knock came 2 weeks later. Imani was preparing dinner. Grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, the kind of meal that photographed well for the nutrition app she used to track her eating habits. The knock was hard, impatient. Not Trent's style. He preferred the soft approach, at least initially. She checked the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway, black, late 50s, wearing scrubs. Her eyes were red. Imani opened the door. "I'm sorry to bother you." The woman's voice cracked. "I'm Dina Morse. I live in 4F down the hall. I saw you told off Trent the other day and I didn't know who else to talk to." "Come in." Dina stepped inside, clutching a folder of papers against her chest like a shield. "They're evicting me." The words came out in a rush. "After 8 years. 8 years, not a single late payment, and they're saying I have to leave in 30 days. Imani guided her to the kitchen table, poured a glass of water, and sat across from her. "What reason did they give?" "Noise complaints." Dina laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They say I've had repeated noise complaints from neighbors. But nobody ever complained to me. Nobody ever said a word. And now they're saying I have to go, or they'll take me to court." "Do you have the notice?" Dina handed over the folder. Inside was a formal notice to vacate, signed by Galloway Property Management. Imani read through it carefully, photographing each page with her phone. "It says here you violated Section 8.2.1 of your lease regarding noise disturbances. I work 12-hour shifts at the hospital. I come home, I sleep, I go back to work. When exactly am I supposed to be making noise? Have you seen the noise complaints they're referencing?" "No. I asked Trent for copies. He said they're confidential." Imani set down the papers. "Dina, there's no such thing as confidential noise complaints in a landlord-tenant dispute. You have a right to see any documented complaints used against you." "That's what I thought, but—" Dina wiped her eyes. "The lawyer for the building, Miranda something, she called me. Said if I fight this, they'll countersue for damages. Said they have pictures of violations in my unit. Said they'll ruin my credit for years. I can't afford a lawyer. I can barely afford my rent." "What's the lawyer's full name?" "Miranda Voss. She works for some big firm downtown." Imani filed that name away. "Dina, I'm not a lawyer, but I know enough to tell you that what they're doing sounds like selective enforcement. if you're being evicted for complaints that don't exist, while other tenants with actual complaints aren't touched. You mean white tenants? Dina's voice hardened. Let's call it what it is. The Hendersons in 4A have parties every weekend, actual parties, with music past midnight. Nobody ever says a word to them. But me? I sleep, and suddenly, I'm the problem. Have you documented that? The parties, the noise levels, the lack of enforcement? Dina shook her head. I didn't think I'd need to. 8 years, no problems, I thought we were fine. Start documenting. Dates, times, anything you can record. If you decide to fight this, you'll need evidence. With what money? I already told you I can't afford. There are legal aid organizations, pro bono lawyers who handle housing discrimination cases. Imani pulled out her phone and typed a quick note. I'll send you some contacts. They're overwhelmed, but cases like yours, multiple tenants, pattern of selective enforcement, sometimes they take priority. Dina stared at her. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Because what's happening to you is wrong. And because... Imani paused. I have a feeling it's going to happen to me too. You? Dina almost laughed. You talked circles around Trent in 30 seconds. He's scared of you. That's exactly why. Dina left an hour later, clutching the list of legal aid contacts Imani had compiled. When she was gone, Imani added a new entry to her evidence folder. Dina Morse, Unit 4F, eviction notice received. Notice. Alleged violations in Section 8.2.1, noise complaints. Tenant denies violations, has not been shown documentation. Selective enforcement pattern continues. She thought about calling Wesley Odom at legal aid, getting Dina's case added to his docket. But Wesley was already drowning in work, and adding more without a strategic plan would just mean longer delays for everyone. Better to wait, build the pattern, document everything, then take them all down at once. 3 weeks after Dina's visit, Imani's own notice arrived. She found it slipped under her door on a Tuesday morning. A crisp white envelope with the Galloway Property Management logo in the corner. Inside was a single sheet of paper, dense with legal language. Notice to cure or quit. Tenant Imani R. Presswood is hereby notified of a violation of lease agreement section 7.3.2. Specifically, installation of a window-mounted air conditioning unit without prior written consent from property management. Tenant has 7 calendar days to cure this violation or vacate the premises. Imani read it twice. Then she pulled out her original lease agreement, the one she'd scanned and saved to 3 separate cloud servers on the day she signed it, and searched for section 7.3.2. The section didn't exist. Her lease ended at section 7.2. There was no 7.3, no 7.3.1, no 7.3.2. She checked the version on the Galloway Property Management website, the one available to prospective tenants. That version also ended at 7.2. They'd invented a lease clause to justify her eviction. Imani photographed the notice, photographed her original lease, and created a side-by-side comparison. Then she called Wesley Odom. They're citing a section that doesn't exist. She kept her voice flat, controlled. Section 7.3.2. My lease only goes to 7.2. Wesley was silent for a moment. You're sure? Sometimes lease amendments? I have the original. I have the version from their website. Neither has a section 7.3. That's... He exhaled slowly. That's potentially fraud. Filing a notice based on a fictitious lease provision. I know what it is. I want to file a complaint. Fair Housing Act, Section 3604, discrimination in the terms and conditions of rental. And I want it assigned to whatever judge handles housing disputes in this district. Imani, most housing cases go to Judge Beckham. I already told you he's... I know who he is. File it anyway. Another long silence. You know something. Wesley's voice was careful. About Beckham. Something you're not telling me. I know he handles most housing cases. I know he has a pattern of ruling against black plaintiffs. I know the system is broken, and the only way to fix it is to document the break." She paused. "Will you represent me?" Wesley sighed. Yes. I'll file the complaint. But you should know, cases like this take months, sometimes years. And the odds of winning in Beckham's courtroom are—" "I'm aware of the odds." "Are you?" "Because I've seen what happens to people who go up against the system and lose. It's not just money, it's time, it's stress, it's—" "File the complaint, Wesley. Let me worry about the rest." He agreed. Reluctantly, skeptically, but he agreed. 2 weeks later, case number 2024 CV 04471 was officially docketed. Presswood v. Galloway Property Management, LLC, filed pursuant to 42 U.S.C. Sephora 3604B, discrimination in terms and conditions of rental. The case was assigned to the Honorable Roland Beckham, Superior Court. Imani read the assignment notification 3 times. Then she smiled. The courtroom is where souls are measured. Wait for it. The first motion hearing was scheduled for 8 weeks later. In between, Imani lived the life of an ordinary tenant fighting an ordinary eviction. She attended community meetings at the Maplewood Heights Rec Center, where she learned that 7 other tenants had received similar notices in the past year. All black. All citing lease violations that the tenants swore didn't exist or weren't enforced against white residents. She visited Dina Morse twice a week, bringing groceries, helping her organize documentation, listening as Dina described the slow-motion destruction of an 8-year home. Dina had found a legal aid lawyer willing to write threatening letters, but nothing more. She was going to lose her apartment. They both knew it. She submitted FOIA requests to the City Code Enforcement Office, asking for records of all inspection complaints filed against Maplewood Heights in the past 3 years. The results showed a stark pattern. 72 complaints filed, 61 against units occupied by black tenants, 11 against units occupied by white tenants. The 11 against white tenants had all been resolved with verbal warnings. 47 of the 61 against black tenants had resulted in formal citations. She compiled everything: dates, names, unit numbers, complaint types, resolution outcomes. She created spreadsheets, charts, timelines. She stored copies in 3 different cloud services, on 2 external hard drives, and in a fireproof safe at a bank vault she maintained under a different LLC's name. And she watched Roland Beckham. She attended other hearings in his courtroom: housing disputes, small claims, contract cases. She sat in the back row, silent, observing. She saw how he treated black plaintiffs versus white plaintiffs, how he sustained objections from certain attorneys while overruling identical objections from others, how he rushed certain cases while giving others unlimited time. After 2 weeks of observation, she had documented 17 instances of apparent bias. Documented, but not proven. Not yet. She needed her own case to prove it. The first hearing came on a Thursday morning in early May. Wesley met her outside the courthouse, looking exhausted. "You should know," he said as they walked toward the entrance. "I tried to get the case reassigned. Filed a motion based on statistical patterns in Beckham's rulings. It was denied." "By whom?" "By Beckham. He denied his own recusal motion." "Can he do that?" "Technically, the motion should have gone to the presiding judge, but the presiding judge is on vacation, so it got routed to Beckham's docket by default. He ruled on it before I even knew it had been filed." Imani absorbed this information. "So he knows we think he's biased, and he's choosing to hear the case anyway. He's daring us to do something about it. Then let's give him what he wants." Inside the courtroom, Miranda Voss was already seated at the defense table, scrolling through her phone with the casual confidence of someone who knew she'd already won. Trent Galloway sat behind her, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. Wesley presented their initial arguments: the fraudulent lease clause, the pattern of selective enforcement, the statistical disparity between complaints filed against black versus white tenants. Beckham listened without expression. Then he spoke. "Counselor, The plaintiff's claims rest on alleged discrimination. But the evidence you've presented is circumstantial at best. A missing lease section could be a clerical error. Disparate enforcement could be explained by legitimate factors unrelated to race. Your Honor, the pattern is clear. The pattern, as you call it, is a collection of unverified statistics. Do you have direct evidence of discriminatory intent by the defendants? Wesley hesitated. Imani watched Beckham's face. Nothing there. No anger, no hostility. Just the practiced neutrality of a man who'd learned to hide his bias behind procedure. We intend to develop that evidence through discovery, Your Honor. Discovery which has not yet been completed. I see no reason to allow this case to proceed further until you've established a viable theory of liability. Beckham folded his hands. Motion to dismiss is taken under advisement. We'll reconvene in 30 days. 30 days. Enough time for Galloway to complete Imani's eviction. Enough time for Dina Morse to lose her apartment. Enough time for the pattern to continue unchecked. Wesley started to object. Imani touched his arm. Thank you, Your Honor. Her voice carried across the courtroom. Beckham's eyes flickered toward her. The first time he'd really looked at her since the hearing began. You're welcome, Ms. Presswood. I hope you'll use this time wisely. There was something in his tone. Not quite a threat, but not neutral either. Imani met his gaze and held it. I always do, Your Honor. After the hearing, Miranda Voss intercepted them in the hallway. Ms. Presswood? The smile was back, warm and professional. I hope today's proceedings have given you some perspective. Judge Beckham is known for his fairness, his attention to procedure. If your case had merit, I'm sure he would have seen it. I'm sure he would have, Imani agreed. My client is still open to settlement. The offer has increased to $10,000, given the time and resources you've invested. A reasonable exit strategy for everyone involved. I'll discuss it with my counsel. Of course you will. Miranda's smile didn't waver. But between us, woman to woman, sometimes the smart play is knowing when you're outmatched. This building, this management company, they have resources you can't imagine. They have relationships with people who matter. You're one tenant with a grievance. They've handled hundreds of people like you. People like me. Tenants. People who think they can fight the system and win. Miranda leaned closer. They never win, Ms. Presswood. Not in this courthouse, not in this city. It's just math. Imani let the silence stretch. Thank you for the advice, Ms. Voss. I'll keep it in mind. She walked away before Miranda could respond, Wesley hurrying to keep up. What was that about? He asked. She was trying to intimidate you. She was succeeding. Imani pushed through the courthouse doors into the May sunshine. That's the first honest thing anyone's said to me all day. What do you mean? She's right. I'm outmatched. One tenant against a property management company with lawyers and judges and city council members in their pocket. The math is exactly what she said it is. Wesley stopped walking. Then why are you still fighting? Imani turned to face him. The sunlight caught the fatigue in his eyes, the worry lines around his mouth. He was a good man, doing his best in a broken system. She'd chosen him specifically because of that. Because he believed in the law even when the law failed him. Because the math changes, Wesley. It always changes. You just have to find the variable they forgot to account for. And what variable is that? She almost told him. Almost pulled out her phone and showed him the donation records, the corporate filings, the recording of Roland Beckham promising favorable treatment. But not yet. The timing wasn't right. You'll see. She started walking again. When it matters. You'll see. The phone call came at 11:47 p.m. that night. Imani was reviewing the FOIA responses when her phone lit up with an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Ms. Presswood? The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. This is Miranda Voss. I apologize for the late hour, but I believe we need to have a private conversation. We spoke earlier today. That was business. This is... Miranda paused. A courtesy. One I shouldn't be extending. Imani sat up straighter. I'm listening. Your case is going to be dismissed, not 30 days from now. Next week. Judge Beckham has already drafted the order. I've seen it. How have you seen a draft order before it's been issued? Because I was in chambers when he wrote it. Miranda's voice dropped lower. Ms. Presswood, I'm not supposed to be telling you this, but what's happening to you isn't justice. It's something else. Something I'm not comfortable being part of. Then why are you part of it? A long pause. Because I have a career. Because I have a family. Because the people who run this city have very long memories and very short tempers. Miranda exhaled. I'm telling you because you seem like someone who doesn't give up easily. And I think you deserve to know what you're up against before they crush you. What am I up against, Ms. Voss? More than a building manager. More than a law firm. There are people invested in making sure cases like yours never see a jury. People who've spent years building a system that protects their interests. Judge Beckham is part of that system. So is my firm. So are half the politicians in this city. Imani's grip tightened on the phone. Why are you telling me this? Because I saw the way you looked at him today. In the courtroom. You weren't scared. You weren't intimidated. You looked at him like... Miranda trailed off. Like you already knew. Knew what? I don't know. But whatever you're planning, whatever you think you have on him, be careful. These people don't lose gracefully, and they don't forget who made them look bad. The line went silent for a moment. Good luck, Ms. Presswood. You're going to need it. The call ended. Imani sat in the dark for a long time, phone still pressed to her ear. Then she opened her laptop and navigated to a folder she hadn't touched in months. Inside was a single audio file, recorded on September 28, 2022, at the Piedmont Country Club. She pressed play. Ms. Presswood, your generosity won't be forgotten. Friends of this campaign, they get fair treatment in my courtroom. I'm counting on that, Your Honor. Please call me Roland. She listened to it 3 times. Then she closed the laptop and began drafting a new motion. If Beckham wanted to dismiss her case early, she'd give him something to dismiss. The eviction hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday, not the lawsuit hearing. That was still technically pending. This was separate. Galloway Property Management exercising their right to remove a tenant in violation of lease terms. The fraudulent Section 7.3.2 had been replaced with a new violation, Section 4.18, Material Breach of Quiet Enjoyment Covenant. Imani had read the new notice 3 times, searching for the specific breach described. There wasn't one. Just vague references to disruptive behavior and interference with property management functions. The hearing was held in a small room on the 2nd floor of the courthouse, not a proper courtroom, but an administrative chamber used for expedited proceedings. The presiding officer wasn't a judge, but a court-appointed magistrate named Harold Fenwick. Imani had never heard of him. Wesley was running late from another hearing. Imani sat alone at the petitioner's table, watching Miranda Voss shuffle papers at the opposite end. Before we begin, Fenwick said, reading from a prepared statement, I want to remind both parties that this is an administrative proceeding to determine the validity of the eviction notice served on Ms. Presswood. This is not a trial. We will not be adjudicating the broader claims in Case 2024 CV ZO4471. Are both parties prepared to proceed? The respondent is ready, Miranda said. Imani nodded. The petitioner is ready. Fenwick flipped through his file. The landlord alleges material breach under Section 4.1.8 of the lease agreement, specifically, that the tenant has engaged in conduct that interferes with the landlord's ability to manage the property, Ms. Voss, would you like to summarize? Thank you, Your Honor. Miranda stood. On 3 occasions, Ms. Presswood has refused entry to property management staff conducting routine inspections. She has cited legal statutes in an aggressive manner designed to intimidate our client. She has encouraged other tenants to refuse cooperation with management, creating a hostile environment throughout the building. These actions constitute a clear breach of her obligation to permit reasonable access and maintain cooperative relations with property staff. Imani felt something cold settle in her chest. They were using her own words against her, her knowledge of the law, her attempts to help Dina and the others. Fenwick turned to her. "Ms. Presswood, your response?" She stood slowly. "The first alleged incident occurred on March 3rd. Mr. Galloway appeared at my door without written notice and demanded entry. I asked if he had provided the 24-hour written notice required under Georgia Code Section 44734. He had not. He left, voluntarily. At no point did I refuse a lawful inspection." She pulled a document from her folder. "This is a copy of my lease agreement, signed on February 1st, 2024. Section 4.1.8 reads, "Tenant shall not interfere with landlord's reasonable access to the premises for inspections, repairs, or maintenance, provided landlord has given appropriate notice as required by applicable law." She set the document on Fenwick's desk. "I have never refused a lawful inspection. I have only declined to waive my rights under Georgia law. Knowing one's legal rights is not aggressive. Exercising one's legal rights is not intimidating. And advising fellow tenants of their legal rights is not creating a hostile environment." Fenwick studied the lease. "Ms. Voss, can you provide documentation of the 3 alleged refusals?" Miranda hesitated. "We have incident reports filed by Mr. Galloway." "Do you have the written notices that were allegedly ignored? The specific inspections that were denied?" A longer hesitation. "The visits were informal welfare checks. Written notice was not required." "Georgia Code 44734 doesn't distinguish between formal and informal visits," Imani said. 24-hour written notice is required for all non-emergency entries." Fenwick's brow furrowed. He picked up his phone and typed something, checking the statute, Imani assumed. "Ms. Presswood appears to be correct." He set the phone down. "Ms. Voss, the landlord's position relies on tenant conduct during allegedly lawful visits. If the visits themselves were not lawfully scheduled, the tenant's refusal cannot constitute breach." Miranda's jaw tightened. "Your Honor, the broader pattern of conduct is not at issue in this hearing. We are addressing the specific eviction notice based on Section 4.1.8. Fenwick closed his file. "I'm dismissing this notice. The landlord has not demonstrated a valid breach of the lease agreement. If they wish to pursue eviction on other grounds, they may file a new notice with proper documentation." "Your Honor, this hearing is adjourned." Miranda gathered her papers in tight, controlled movements. She didn't look at Imani as she left, but her heels struck the floor harder than necessary. Imani allowed herself one small breath of relief. Then her phone buzzed. "Wesley, where are you?" "Beckham just moved up the dismissal hearing. It's in 20 minutes. She was already running." The dismissal hearing had been scheduled for 2 p.m. the following week. Somehow, without notice to plaintiff's counsel, it had been reclassified as an emergency scheduling matter and moved to 11:15 that morning. Imani made it to courtroom 4 at 11:22. Wesley was already at the plaintiff's table, face flushed with exertion and anger. "They didn't notify us," he whispered as she slid into the seat beside him. "I only found out because one of the clerks felt bad and texted me. This is completely improper." "Is there grounds for objection?" "I already tried. Beckham said the hearing was properly noticed through the court's electronic system. Apparently our access was inadvertently suspended due to a technical error." Imani looked toward the clerk's desk. Felix Drummond sat there, studiously avoiding her gaze, arranging papers with exaggerated precision. Beckham entered through the rear door. He didn't look at either table as he took his seat. Case 2024 CV04471, Presswood v. Galloway Property Management. The court has reviewed the motion for summary dismissal filed by the defendant and the plaintiff's opposition. He opened a folder. After careful consideration of the evidence and arguments presented, the court finds that the plaintiff has failed to establish a prima facie case of housing discrimination under 42 U.S.C. Section 3604. Wesley was on his feet. Your Honor, we haven't completed discovery. The statistical evidence alone is insufficient without direct evidence of discriminatory intent. Beckham didn't look up from his prepared text. The plaintiff has alleged selective enforcement but has provided no testimony from witnesses to the alleged discrimination. No internal communications demonstrating bias. No evidence that similarly situated white tenants were treated differently under comparable circumstances. The FOIA responses show a clear pattern. The FOIA responses show disparities that could be explained by numerous factors unrelated to race. Higher rates of lease violations among certain populations, different complaint patterns, variations in unit conditions. Beckham finally raised his eyes. Correlation is not causation, counselor. You know that. Your Honor, if we could just have additional time for discovery. Discovery was open for 8 weeks. The plaintiff chose not to depose any witnesses, chose not to subpoena any documents beyond the FOIA requests, chose not to build a case beyond statistical inference. Beckham closed the folder. Motion to dismiss is granted. This is Case 2024 CV04471 is dismissed with prejudice. With prejudice, meaning she couldn't refile, couldn't try again. The case was dead. Wesley looked like he'd been struck. Your Honor, I object to the characterization of our discovery efforts. We were operating under severe time constraints imposed by this court's own scheduling. Your objection is noted. Beckham picked up his gavel. Court is adjourned. He struck the gavel once and was gone before the echo faded. Outside the courtroom, Wesley leaned against the wall, breathing hard. I've never seen anything like that. The accelerated hearing, the dismissal without reviewing our evidence, He shook his head. Imani, I'm so sorry. I should have fought harder for more time. You did everything you could. I didn't. I was too careful, too worried about sanctions, He stopped. What are you going to do? Imani watched the courtroom door. Felix Drummond emerged, walking quickly toward the administrative offices. He glanced back once, saw her watching, and hurried faster. I'm going to appeal. Appeal? On what grounds? Beckham followed procedure. Barely, but technically. Improper notice of the hearing, access to electronic filing deliberately restricted, statistical evidence dismissed without proper consideration, and... She turned to face him. Bias. Demonstrated bias in the handling of this case. Wesley's expression shifted. Imani, making accusations against a sitting judge. I'm not making accusations. I'm documenting facts. The same way I documented Galloway's violations. The same way I documented the inspection attempts and the fraudulent lease clauses. She pulled out her phone. Wesley, I need you to file one more thing for me. What? A motion for recusal under 28 U.S.C. Section 455, for the appeal if we get one. But more importantly, for the record. Recusal? Based on what? Imani met his eyes. She'd kept this from him for 14 months, kept it from everyone, but the time for waiting was over. Based on the fact that Citizens for Fair Courts PAC, the PAC that funded Judge Beckham's 2022 campaign, received $2.3 million from a single donor, a Delaware LLC called Maple Grove Holdings. Wesley stared at her. And Maple Grove Holdings, Imani continued, is wholly owned by me. The silence stretched between them. Wesley's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked almost like fear. You... He couldn't finish the sentence. I donated $2.3 million to his campaign. Through a PAC, through an LLC, structured specifically so the connection wouldn't be obvious. He didn't know who I was. He still doesn't. Imani kept her voice steady. But I knew who he was. I knew his record before he was elected. I knew what he would do with that seat. And I needed to prove it. You engineered this entire thing? The apartment, the eviction, the lawsuit? I didn't engineer the discrimination. That was happening long before I arrived. I just documented it. She pulled up a file on her phone. 14 cases in 3 years, Wesley. 14 housing discrimination cases that landed in Beckham's courtroom. 11 with black plaintiffs. All 11 lost. The 3 with white plaintiffs, all 3 won. Wesley took the phone with shaking hands. This is Imani, this is what I needed to prove, and now I have the evidence to prove it. She met his eyes. I have the donation records, I have the FEC filings, and I have a recording of Roland Beckham promising me, personally, that friends of his campaign would receive favorable treatment in his courtroom. Wesley's face went pale. A recording. Made at a fundraiser in September 2022. Single-party consent state. Completely legal. Imani took the phone back. I didn't want to play it early. I needed the pattern first. I needed the dismissal. I needed to show what he does to black plaintiffs who don't have leverage, and then show what he said to me when he thought I was just another rich donor. You've been playing him this whole time. I've been documenting him this whole time. There's a difference. She started walking toward the exit. File the motion, Wesley. Not for me, for Dina Morse, for the 11 other plaintiffs who lost in his courtroom, for everyone who's going to come after us. Wesley hurried to catch up. Imani, if you go public with this, if you file a motion based on campaign contributions and recorded promises, you're going to war with the entire judiciary, the Bar Association, every political faction that supported Beckham's campaign. I know. They'll destroy you. They'll find every business you've ever run, every deal you've ever made, every mistake you've ever... I know. She pushed through the courthouse doors into the afternoon light. That's why I've spent the last 10 years making sure there aren't any mistakes to find. She turned to face him one last time. File the motion, Wesley. I'll see you at the hearing. She walked to her car, the Honda Civic, 11 years old, parked in the far corner of the lot, and drove back to Maplewood Heights. The first phase was complete. Beckham had shown exactly who he was. Now it was time to show him who she was. The truth has a schedule, and we're right on time. Chuck. That evening, Imani sat in her apartment, laptop open, preparing the documents she would need for the next stage. The Delaware Certificate of Formation for Maple Grove Holdings, LLC, the operating agreement listing Imani R. Presswood as the sole member and beneficial owner. The wire transfer confirmation from October 14, 2022, $2.3 million, transferred from Maple Grove Holdings to Citizens for Fair Courts PAC, the FEC Form 3X showing the receipt of funds, and the audio recording. 47 seconds that would end Roland Beckham's career. She listened to it one more time. Ms. Presswood, your generosity won't be forgotten. Friends of this campaign, they get fair treatment in my courtroom. His voice was warm, confident, the voice of a man who believed he was among allies, who believed his words would never leave that room. I'm counting on that, Your Honor. Her own voice, measured, careful, playing a role. Please, call me Roland. She saved the file to 3 separate drives, encrypted each one with a different password, stored one in her apartment safe, one in a bank vault, one in a cloud server registered to a different LLC. Then she began drafting the motion. Motion for recusal and emergency stay of dismissal order, pursuant to 28 U.S.C. Section 455A. The plaintiff respectfully moves for the immediate recusal of the Honorable Roland Beckham from all proceedings in this matter, and for an emergency stay of the dismissal order entered on date. The grounds for this motion are as follows. 1. Judge Beckham's impartiality might reasonably be questioned due to a substantial campaign contribution from an entity wholly owned by the plaintiff. 2. Judge Beckham made statements to the plaintiff prior to his election indicating that contributors to his campaign would receive favorable treatment in his courtroom. 3. Judge Beckham's conduct in this case, including the dismissal of statistical evidence, the expedited scheduling of hearings without proper notice, and the sustained pattern of adverse rulings, is consistent with the bias demonstrated in his pre-election statements. She worked until 2 a.m., refining each paragraph, anticipating objections, building a case that would be impossible to ignore. By the time she finished, the motion was 32 pages long, detailed, documented, devastating. She attached the audio recording as Exhibit A. Then she saved the document and went to bed. Tomorrow, she would file it. Tomorrow, the war would begin. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of something that felt almost like peace. 14 months of waiting. 14 months of pretending to be powerless. 14 months of watching a man abuse his authority, confident that no one could stop him. It was almost over. Almost. Imani didn't sleep well that night. She kept dreaming of the courtroom, Beckham's face, expressionless, his gavel falling again and again, and woke before dawn with her heart pounding. She made coffee, reviewed the motion one more time, found 3 typos, and fixed them. At 7:45, she drove to Wesley's office. He was already there, haggard, surrounded by stacks of files. He'd been up all night, too. "I've been thinking," he said before she could speak, "about the motion, about what happens after." And you're right. It needs to be filed. The evidence is too clear. The pattern is too obvious. He rubbed his eyes. "But Imani, I need you to understand what we're walking into. This isn't just a legal case anymore. This is political. Beckham has friends, powerful friends. The moment we file, they're going to come after you." "I know." "Do you?" He leaned forward. "I mean, really know. Not just intellectually. They'll dig into your finances, your business dealings, your personal life. Anything they can use to discredit you, they'll use. I've anticipated that. They might not stop at discrediting. People who threaten powerful interests, sometimes they face threats themselves." He lowered his voice. "I got a call last night. Unknown number. A man's voice. He said, 'Tell your client to reconsider.'" Imani felt her pulse quicken. "What else did he say?" "Nothing. He hung up." She forced herself to breathe evenly. This was expected. Intimidation was part of their playbook. "Did you report it?" "To whom? The police? In this city? With these connections?" Wesley laughed bitterly. "I saved the call log. That's all I can do." Imani nodded slowly. "File the motion, Wesley. Whatever comes next, we face it together." He studied her face for a long moment. "Who are you, Imani? Really? Not the version in your lease application. Not the tenant fighting an eviction. Who are you?" She considered the question. "I'm someone who got tired of watching people like Beckham win. Who decided that if the system won't hold them accountable, I would." She handed him the flash drive containing the motion and all supporting exhibits. "I'm someone who planned very carefully for this moment. And I'm someone who doesn't lose." Wesley took the drive. "I hope you're right." He turned to his computer. "Let's file this thing." The motion was filed at 9:17 a.m. By 9:42, Imani's phone was ringing. Unknown number. She answered anyway. "Ms. Presswood." The voice was female, clipped, professional. "This is Councilwoman Lorraine Sheffy's office. The councilwoman would like to speak with you urgently." "About what?" A pause. "About your motion to recuse Judge Beckham. The councilwoman believes there may be room for discussion." "Discussion of what, exactly?" "That would be better addressed in person. The councilwoman has an opening at 11 this morning. Her office at City Hall." Imani checked the time. Just under 90 minutes. "I'll be there," She hung up and called Wesley. "The councilwoman?" He sounded stunned. "Lorraine Sheffy? She's one of Beckham's biggest supporters. She was at the fundraiser where—" "I know. I saw her there." "Then why would she want to meet? Unless—" Wesley trailed off. "Unless she's trying to make this go away." "That's exactly what she's trying to do." "And you're going to walk right into it?" Imani smiled. "Of course I am. That's the whole point." City Hall was a 100-year-old building with marble floors and brass fixtures, a monument to an era when public architecture was meant to inspire awe. Imani arrived at 10:55 and was escorted immediately to Councilwoman Sheffy's third-floor office. Lorraine Sheffy was 62 years old, silver-haired, elegant in a way that came from decades of practice. She rose from behind her desk as Imani entered, extending a hand with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Miss Presswood, thank you for coming on such short notice." "Thank you for the invitation, Councilwoman." They sat across from each other, Sheffy behind her desk, Imani in a leather chair that was slightly lower, a subtle power play. "I'll be direct," Sheffy said. "Your motion has caused considerable concern among certain stakeholders in this city. Judge Beckham is a respected jurist with a distinguished record. The allegations you've made could damage his reputation irreparably. The allegations I've made are supported by documented evidence. Documented evidence can be interpreted in many ways." Sheffy folded her hands. "A campaign contribution, filtered through an LLC, made before Judge Beckham even knew you as a plaintiff in his courtroom. That's hardly proof of corruption. And as for the recording—" She paused delicately. "Audio can be manipulated. Contexts can be misrepresented. A few words at a fundraiser taken out of context might not mean what you think they mean." "I see. I'm not here to threaten you, Ms. Presswood. I'm here to offer an alternative." Sheffy leaned forward. "Withdraw the motion. In exchange, your case will be reopened, assigned to a different judge, of course. You'll have every opportunity to pursue your claims against Galloway Property Management through proper channels. And—" She paused. "Certain other matters will be resolved quietly." "What other matters?" "The eviction proceedings, the complaints against your neighbor, Ms. Morse, the inspections that have been causing such difficulty at Maplewood Heights." Sheffy smiled. "A word in the right ear, and all of that goes away." Imani considered this offer. "And if I don't withdraw?" The smile faded. "Then the matter proceeds through the courts, which it will eventually, regardless of your motion. Judge Beckham will be cleared of any wrongdoing. These accusations never stick, Ms. Presswood, not against men of his standing, and you will have made powerful enemies with long memories." She paused. "Your business interests, for example. The LLCs, the real estate holdings. I'm sure everything is properly documented. But documentation can be reviewed, audited, questioned." "Is that a threat, Councilwoman?" "It's a statement of fact." Sheffy rose from her desk, signaling the meeting was over. "You have until end of business tomorrow to make your decision. I hope you'll choose wisely." Imani stood. "I appreciate your candor, Councilwoman. I'll give your offer the consideration it deserves." She walked out without looking back. In the elevator, she pulled out her phone and checked that the recording app had captured the entire conversation. It had. She added it to her evidence folder and drove back to Wesley's office. "She threatened you?" Wesley looked horrified when Imani played him the recording. "On tape? Is she insane?" "She's not insane. She's arrogant." Imani pocketed her phone. "She doesn't think anything she says matters because she doesn't think I can touch her. She thinks I'm one woman against the entire system." "Aren't you?" "No." Imani met his eyes. "I'm one woman with $2.3 million of documented leverage against a judge, a recording of a councilwoman offering quid pro quo to obstruct justice, and 14 months of evidence showing a pattern of racial bias in housing discrimination cases. I'm not alone. I'm just the one they can see." Wesley stared at her. "What do you mean, the one they can see?" Imani pulled out her laptop and opened a file. The Department of Justice has a civil rights division. They investigate patterns of discrimination in housing, employment, and... She scrolled to a specific email. And judicial conduct. I've been in contact with them for 6 months. They were waiting to see if the state system would self-correct. And now they know it won't. Wesley read the email. His face changed. You've been building a federal case this whole time. I've been building documentation. The federal case builds itself when the state system refuses to act. She closed the laptop. File the motion tomorrow morning. Include the recording of Sheffy as a supplemental exhibit. And then... She smiled grimly. And then we see who blinks first. The next 48 hours were the longest of Imani's life. The motion with supplemental exhibits, including the Sheffy recording, was filed at 9 a.m. By noon, 3 reporters had called Wesley's office asking for comment. By 3 p.m., the story was on the local news. By 6 p.m., it was national. Georgia judge accused of campaign corruption in housing discrimination case. Anonymous donor revealed as plaintiff in own lawsuit. Recording emerges of councilwoman offering quid pro quo to block judicial investigation. Imani watched the coverage from her apartment, phone silenced, blinds drawn. The story was bigger than she'd anticipated. The recording of Beckham promising favorable treatment had gone viral. The Sheffy conversation was being parsed by legal analysts on cable news. At 8:47 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text from Wesley. JQC announced investigation into Beckham. Hearing scheduled for 6 weeks out. Judicial Qualifications Commission, the body responsible for investigating misconduct by Georgia judges. They'd moved faster than she'd expected. A second text followed. Sheffy announced leave of absence. Family reasons. Imani set down the phone. It was happening. All of it. The pieces she'd spent 14 months arranging were finally falling into place. But something felt wrong. Too easy. Too fast. She got up and checked the locks on her door. The windows. The fire escape. Everything secure. She went back to her laptop and opened the FOIA folder. The responses from the clerk's office, the code enforcement records, the statistical analyses. Something was missing. She scrolled through the files, checking each one against her master list. There. 2 case numbers referenced in the clerk's response that had no corresponding files. Cases 2021 CV0892 and 2022 CV1104. Both listed as housing discrimination. Both with redacted plaintiff names. Both dismissed by Judge Beckham. She'd requested those files specifically. The response had said they were exempt under judicial privilege. What was in those files that required special protection? She picked up her phone and called Wesley. The 2 redacted cases, 0892 and 1104. I need you to file another FOIA request. Different angle. Ask for the docket entries, not the case files themselves. Public information. Harder to claim privilege. Now? Imani, it's almost 9 o'clock. First thing tomorrow. I need to know who the plaintiffs were and why those cases are being protected. She hung up before he could argue. Outside her window, the parking lot was dark, but in the far corner, under a broken streetlight, she could see the shape of a car. Engine off, lights off, someone sitting inside, watching. Imani closed the blinds and didn't sleep at all that night. The judicial conduct hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, an eternity in legal terms, but lightning fast for the JQC. Whatever they'd found in their initial review had clearly alarmed them. In the meantime, Imani's life became a carefully managed performance. She went to work, the cover job she'd maintained at a nonprofit legal aid clinic, answering phones and filing documents, a position that paid almost nothing but provided perfect cover for her actual activities. She attended community meetings at Maplewood Heights, updating her neighbors on the lawsuit's progress, carefully omitting the details that would make her sound anything other than a determined tenant. She met with Wesley every few days, reviewing the mounting evidence, preparing for the JQC hearing. The DOJ had opened their own preliminary inquiry. Not a full investigation yet, but enough to signal that federal attention was coming. And every night, she checked the parking lot for the car that had been there since the motion was filed. It was always there. Different car sometimes, different driver, but always watching. 3 weeks after the motion, Imani received a visitor. She was leaving the legal aid clinic at 5:30 p.m. when a man stepped out of a black SUV parked at the curb. Ms. Presswood. He was tall, white, mid-50s, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. My name is Douglas Wentworth. I represent Citizens for Fair Courts PAC. Imani stopped walking. The PAC I donated $2.3 million to? The very same. He smiled, a politician's smile, warm and entirely artificial. I was hoping we could talk. About what? About finding a resolution that works for everyone. He gestured toward the SUV. May I give you a ride somewhere? We could talk on the way. I prefer to drive myself, Mr. Wentworth. But if you'd like to buy me a cup of coffee, there's a diner 2 blocks east. His smile flickered but held. Coffee it is. Sure. The diner was mostly empty at that hour. Imani chose a booth near the window, where she could see both the door and the parking lot. Wentworth slid into the seat across from her, his suit somehow remaining immaculate despite the cracked vinyl upholstery. I'll be direct, he said. My clients are concerned about the direction this situation is taking. Your clients? The major donors to Citizens for Fair Courts. Business leaders, community figures, people who believed in Judge Beckham's vision for the judiciary. He stirred his coffee without drinking it. Your donation is, greatly appreciated. But the way you've chosen to deploy the leverage that donation created is causing considerable anxiety. I haven't deployed anything. I've simply disclosed facts. Facts that are damaging to a good man's reputation. Facts that show a pattern of racial bias in judicial decision-making. Wentworth's smile thinned. Ms. Presswood, let me be frank. The people I represent have resources you cannot imagine. They have connections in every branch of government, every regulatory agency, every media outlet that matters. If they decide to make your life difficult, he shrugged. There are many ways to make a life difficult. Is that a threat, Mr. Wentworth? It's an observation. He leaned forward. But it doesn't have to go that way. My clients are prepared to offer a substantial settlement, not just for your lawsuit, which, as you know, has already been dismissed, but for the broader situation. Walk away from the JQC hearing, withdraw your statements to the DOJ, sign a non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, he named a figure, $2 million. That's less than I donated to the campaign, Imani observed. It's tax-free, and it comes with certain guarantees, protection, you might say, from the difficulties I mentioned earlier. Imani looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Wentworth, when I donated to Citizens for Fair Courts, I believed I was supporting a fair judiciary. When Judge Beckham told me that friends of the campaign would receive favorable treatment, I recorded it, not because I planned to use it, but because I've learned that powerful men rarely keep their promises, unless there's a record. She set down her coffee cup. When I saw what he was doing to black plaintiffs in his courtroom, the dismissals, the accelerated hearings, the convenient technical errors, I realized that favorable treatment meant something very specific. It meant people like me got justice, and people without connections didn't. She stood. I'm not interested in your settlement. I'm not interested in your guarantees, and I'm not interested in protecting a system that only works for people who can afford to buy their way in. Wentworth's smile was gone. You're making a mistake, Ms. Presswood, a serious mistake. Possibly. She dropped a $5 bill on the table. But it's my mistake to make. Coffee's on me. She walked out of the diner, got in her car, and drove away without looking back. Her hands didn't start shaking until she was 3 blocks away. That night, the car in her parking lot had company. 2 vehicles now, 3 people visible in the darkness. Imani called the non-emergency police line and reported suspicious vehicles loitering near her building. A patrol car arrived 40 minutes later, swept its lights across the lot, and left. The other cars stayed. She made a note of the license plates and added them to her file. Then she began packing. Not leaving, not yet, but preparing. Important documents went into a waterproof bag, backup drives into a fireproof safe, essentials into a suitcase that could be grabbed in 60 seconds. She'd planned for this possibility. Planned for the moment when watching turned into something else, but planning and experiencing were different things. At 2 a.m., her phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text this time. Last chance. She deleted it and went back to packing. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of legal filings, media interviews, and sleepless nights. The JQC hearing approached. Wesley had prepared a presentation that walked through every case in Beckham's record, every statistical anomaly, every documented instance of bias. The DOJ had sent an observer, unofficial but present. Imani's face was everywhere. Local news, national news, legal blogs, social media. She'd become a symbol, the woman who'd bought a judge and then exposed him. And symbols attracted attention of all kinds. Death threats arrived daily. Emailed, texted, slipped under her door. She reported each one, saved each one, added each one to the growing file that documented the cost of standing up. 3 days before the hearing, she received a different kind of message. A letter, hand-delivered to the legal aid clinic where she worked. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper with a single line. 0892 was my mother. She died last year. She never got justice. Thank you. No signature. Imani stared at the words for a long time. Case 2021, CV 0892. One of the 2 redacted cases. A plaintiff who'd lost before Beckham, who'd died without knowing that anyone cared. She added the letter to her file, evidence of a different kind. Then she drove to Wesley's office to prepare for the hearing. The night before the JQC hearing, Imani couldn't sleep. She sat in her apartment, lights off, watching the parking lot through a gap in the blinds. The watching cars had multiplied over the past week. 4 of them now, rotating shifts, making no effort to hide. Let them watch. Let them see that she wasn't running. At 2:37 a.m., her phone rang. Not a text. A call. Unknown number. She answered. Ms. Presswood? The voice was male, unfamiliar, professional. I'm calling on behalf of certain interested parties. There's been a development you should be aware of. Who is this? That's not important. What's important is that Judge Beckham has decided to resign, effective immediately, before the hearing. Imani felt something cold move through her chest. Resign? Quietly, with his pension intact, no admission of wrongdoing. In exchange, the JQC agrees to close its investigation. The matter ends here. That's not justice. No. The voice was almost sympathetic. It's politics, which is what this has always been, despite your efforts to make it about law. And if I don't accept this resolution, a long pause, then things become more complicated. For everyone. The voice hardened slightly. The resignation will be announced at 8 a.m. tomorrow. The hearing will be canceled. You can accept this outcome and move on with your life. Or you can fight it and discover exactly how many resources our interested parties are willing to deploy. I want the pattern or practice investigation to continue. DOJ jurisdiction. That's not on the table. Then neither is my cooperation. Another long pause. You're a remarkable woman, Ms. Presswood. Stubborn, principled, foolish, perhaps, but principled. The voice sighed. The resignation will happen regardless. What happens to you afterward? That's your choice. The line went dead. Imani sat in the darkness for a long time. Then she called Wesley. They're going to let him resign. Before the hearing. Pension intact. No admission of wrongdoing. Wesley's voice was thick with sleep. That's better than nothing. Better. A resignation is still accountability. It's not accountability, it's escape. She stood up and started pacing. Beckham walks away with his pension. The other victims never get their day in court. The system learns that judges can be corrupt as long as they know when to quit. Imani, if you try to block the resignation, I'm not going to block it. I'm going to make sure it's not the end. What do you mean? She looked out the window at the watching cars. The DOJ inquiry is still open. The evidence I've gathered doesn't disappear because Beckham retires. The pattern of bias in his courtroom, 11 cases, 11 black plaintiffs, 11 losses, that's a matter of public record now. So what are you going to do? Imani smiled in the darkness. I'm going to make sure the record speaks for itself. The resignation announcement came at 7:58 a.m., 2 minutes ahead of schedule. Imani watched it on her phone, standing in the parking lot of Wesley's office building. The local news anchor read the statement with practiced neutrality. Superior Court Judge Roland Beckham announced his immediate resignation this morning, citing personal reasons. The Judicial Qualifications Commission has agreed to close its pending investigation in light of the resignation. Judge Beckham released a statement thanking the citizens of Georgia for the opportunity to serve and expressing his intention to spend more time with family. No admission of wrongdoing, no acknowledgement of the 14 cases, no mention of the $2.3 million or the recorded promise at the Piedmont Country Club, just gone, as if none of it had happened. Wesley emerged from the building, coffee in hand, face grim. I just got off the phone with the JQC. He handed her a cup. They're calling it a satisfactory resolution. The investigation is officially closed. And the DOJ? Still pending, but without the JQC findings to build on, they're starting from scratch. Could take years. Imani sipped her coffee. It was bitter, overbrewed, perfect for her mood. What about my case? Presswood versus Galloway? That's the interesting part. Wesley pulled out his phone, scrolling to an email. With Beckham off the bench, the dismissal order is under automatic review. His replacement, Judge Anita Delacroix, has already requested the full case file. She wants a status conference next week. Delacroix. What do we know about her? Appointed 3 years ago. Moderate record. No obvious connections to Beckham's circle. Wesley shrugged. As good as we could hope for, under the circumstances. Imani nodded slowly. The case wasn't dead. That was something, but it wasn't enough. The two redacted cases, she said, 0892 and 1104. Did you file the follow-up FOIA? Yesterday. Response pending. Push it. I want those docket entries before the status conference. Wesley studied her face. Imani, Beckham is gone. The immediate threat is neutralized. Maybe it's time to focus on winning your actual case instead of what? Exposing the full scope of what he did? She set down her coffee cup. 11 plaintiffs lost in his courtroom, Wesley. 11 black families who were told their evidence wasn't good enough, their claims weren't valid, their experiences didn't matter. Beckham's resignation doesn't give them justice. It just lets the system pretend the problem was one bad actor instead of a pattern. The DOJ investigation could take years. You said it yourself. And in the meantime, the same developers, the same property managers, the same lawyers keep doing exactly what they've been doing because the message they receive today isn't stop discriminating. It's be more careful about who you discriminate against. Wesley was quiet for a long moment. What do you want to do? Imani looked up at the courthouse, visible 3 blocks away. The building where Beckham had sat in judgment, where he'd dismissed case after case, confident that no one was watching, no one was keeping count. I want to make sure everyone is watching now. The status conference was scheduled for the following Thursday. In the days leading up to it, Imani worked with Wesley to rebuild their case from the ground up. The statistical evidence remained strong. 14 housing discrimination cases in Beckham's courtroom, 11 with black plaintiffs, all 11 dismissed or ruled against. The body cam footage that Beckham had excluded was ready to be resubmitted. The FOIA documents showing selective code enforcement at Maplewood Heights had been organized into a comprehensive timeline. But the case had changed. It was no longer just Presswood versus Galloway Property Management. It was a test of whether the system could correct itself, whether a new judge, reviewing the same evidence, would reach a different conclusion. Judge Anita Delacroix's courtroom was smaller than Beckham's, located in a newer wing of the courthouse. The furniture was functional rather than ornate, the lighting fluorescent rather than dramatic. It felt less like a temple of justice and more like an office where work actually got done. Delacroix herself was in her late 40s, with short gray hair and reading glasses that she wore on a chain around her neck. She reviewed the case file in silence for several minutes before speaking. "Counsel, I've read the submissions from both parties. I've also reviewed the original dismissal order and the grounds cited." She looked up. "Mr. Odom, your client's claims were dismissed for failure to establish discriminatory intent. The statistical evidence was characterized as circumstantial. Can you explain what additional evidence you intend to present if the case is reopened?" Wesley stood. "Your Honor, we have 3 categories of new evidence. First, the body cam footage that was excluded by the previous judge on chain of custody grounds. We've obtained additional authentication from the police department's IT specialist, including server logs showing the footage was never altered or accessed improperly." He handed a folder to the clerk. "Second, we have documentation from the City Code Enforcement Office showing a pattern of selective enforcement against black tenants at Maplewood Heights. 72 complaints in 3 years, 61 against black tenants, only 11 against white tenants. Of those 61, 47 resulted in formal citations. Of the 11 against white tenants, all were resolved with verbal warnings only." Another folder. "Third, we have testimony from 6 current and former tenants who are prepared to describe specific instances of discriminatory treatment. Their statements are consistent with the pattern shown in the documentary evidence." Delacroix examined the folders, flipping through pages with methodical attention. "Ms. Voss?" She looked toward the defense table. "Response?" Miranda Voss rose slowly. Her usual composure seemed slightly frayed. A button unfastened at her collar, a strand of hair out of place. "Your Honor, the defendant maintains that the original dismissal was correct. The statistical evidence remains circumstantial. The tenant testimony is self-serving. And the body cam footage, regardless of authentication, does not demonstrate discriminatory intent by my client." "The footage shows your client's property manager stating that Beckham will handle it in reference to evicting a black tenant," Wesley interjected. "That's direct evidence of coordination between Galloway Property Management and a judge who has since resigned under investigation for bias." "Objection. Speculation about the meaning of an ambiguous statement." "The statement isn't ambiguous, Your Honor. Mr. Galloway explicitly referenced a sitting judge in the context of removing a tenant. The implication is clear." Delacroix raised a hand. "Counsel, I'll make my own determination about the implications of the evidence." She removed her reading glasses, letting them hang on their chain. "Here's what I see. A case that was dismissed without full discovery. Evidence that was excluded on technical grounds that appear questionable. A pattern of judicial conduct that has since resulted in the presiding judge's resignation." She folded her hands. "I'm reopening the case. Discovery will resume for an additional 60 days. The body cam footage is admitted subject to proper foundation at trial, and I'm scheduling a hearing on the pattern or practice evidence for—" She checked her calendar. 8 weeks from today." Miranda's face tightened. "Your Honor, my client objects to the characterization of the previous proceedings." "Your objection is noted." Delacroix picked up her gavel. "We'll reconvene in 60 days. Court adjourned." The gavel fell once. Wesley exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. "We got it," he whispered. "We actually got it." Imani nodded, but her eyes were on Miranda Voss, who was gathering her papers with sharp, angry movements. Their gazes met for a moment. Miranda looked away first. After the hearing, Imani walked to the clerk's office to check on her FOIA request. Felix Drummond was gone, his desk occupied by a young woman with a pleasant smile who introduced herself as the interim clerk. Drummond had resigned 3 days after Beckham's announcement, citing health reasons. No investigation, no consequences. Just gone. The interim clerk handed Imani a thin folder. Your FOIA response came in this morning. Docket entries for cases 2021 CV0892 and 2022 CV1104. Imani opened the folder in the hallway. The docket entries were sparse: filing dates, hearing dates, dismissal dates. But one detail caught her eye. Both cases had the same plaintiff's attorney, a lawyer named Gerald Whitmore, who had filed housing discrimination claims against the same defendant, Galloway Property Management, the same company Imani was suing. She pulled out her phone and searched for Gerald Whitmore. The results were sparse: a few old bar association listings, a defunct law firm website, no current practice information. She tried a different search: Gerald Whitmore obituary. The result appeared immediately. Gerald Whitmore, 67, passed away on March 3, 2023, after a brief illness. Mr. Whitmore practiced civil rights law for over 30 years, specializing in housing discrimination cases. He is survived by his wife, Eleanor, and 2 children. March 3, 2023. Almost 2 years ago. The lawyer who had filed both redacted cases was dead. His clients' identities were protected by judicial privilege, and the cases themselves had been sealed, not just dismissed, but actively hidden from public view. Imani made a note of Eleanor Whitmore's name. Then she drove to the address listed in the obituary. Choi. The Whitmore house was a modest colonial in a quiet suburb north of the city. The lawn was well maintained, the flower beds recently weeded. A woman in her 60s answered the door, silver-haired, cautious, with eyes that had seen more than they should have. Mrs. Whitmore? My name is Imani Presswood. I'm a plaintiff in a housing discrimination case against Galloway Property Management. I believe your husband represented clients with similar claims. The woman's face went pale. I can't talk about Gerald's cases. There were confidentiality agreements. After he died, the lawyers said I couldn't. I'm not asking about confidential information, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm asking about patterns, about what your husband discovered before he died. Eleanor Whitmore stared at her for a long moment. You should come inside. The living room was filled with photographs. Gerald Whitmore at various ages, young lawyer, middle-aged advocate, elderly man with tired eyes and a determined set to his jaw, civil rights plaques on the walls, certificates of recognition from organizations Imani recognized. Eleanor made tea with trembling hands. Gerald spent the last 5 years of his career trying to expose what was happening at Galloway Properties. Not just the one building, the whole network. They own 6 apartment complexes across the county. Same pattern everywhere. Black tenants cited for violations, white tenants ignored. Black tenants evicted on pretextual grounds, white tenants allowed to stay regardless of behavior. She set down the teapot. He filed 2 cases. Both were assigned to Judge Beckham. Both were dismissed for insufficient evidence. The second dismissal broke him. He said, her voice cracked. He said the system was rigged, that Beckham was getting money from somewhere, that someone was paying for those rulings. Did he have proof? He was gathering it. Campaign finance records, donation patterns. He found something, I don't know what, but he was excited. Said he finally had what he needed. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. And then he got sick. Suddenly. Within weeks he was gone. Imani felt something cold move through her chest. What kind of sickness? The doctors said it was aggressive cancer. By the time they found it, it had spread everywhere. There was nothing they could do. Eleanor wiped her eyes. But Gerald never smoked, never drank, healthy as a horse his whole life. And then, right when he was about to blow this thing wide open. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Where are his files? Imani asked quietly. The research he was gathering. Gone. His office was broken into 2 weeks after he died. The police said it was a routine burglary, Laptop stolen, some cash, the usual. But they took all his Galloway files. Every document, every note, everything. Imani absorbed this information. Did he keep any backups, cloud storage, safety deposit box? Eleanor shook her head. Gerald didn't trust computers. Everything was paper, and the paper, she gestured helplessly. Gone. Imani set down her tea. Mrs. Whitmore, I know this is difficult, but I need to ask, did your husband ever mention who he thought was behind the payments to Beckham? Any names? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. He mentioned a woman once, a councilwoman. Said she was the gatekeeper, that nothing happened in this city's housing courts without her approval. She looked up. Sheffy, Lorraine Sheffy. Imani nodded slowly. Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. You've been very helpful. Ms. Presswood? Eleanor's voice stopped her at the door. Be careful. My husband thought he was untouchable. He'd been fighting these battles for 30 years. He knew the system inside and out. Her eyes hardened. And they still got him. Imani met her gaze. I know. That's why I'm not fighting the system the way he did. What do you mean? Imani smiled grimly. I mean I'm fighting it from the inside. The drive back to her apartment was quiet. Imani's mind was processing everything Eleanor Whitmore had told her. The sealed cases, the stolen files, the sudden illness that had struck a healthy man at exactly the wrong moment. Coincidence? Maybe. Gerald Whitmore was 67 years old. Cancer happened. Burglaries happened. But the timing, the precision, the way every piece of evidence he'd gathered had simply vanished. That wasn't coincidence. That was cleaning house. She pulled into the Maplewood Heights parking lot and stopped. The watching cars were gone. For the first time in weeks, the lot was empty except for residents' vehicles. No black sedans with tinted windows, no rotating shifts of silent observers. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it made her nervous. She checked her phone. No new messages. No threatening texts. No unknown callers. Something had changed. She just didn't know what. She got out of her car, keys in hand, and walked toward the building entrance. The door to the lobby was propped open with a brick. That was wrong. The door was always locked. Residents used keycards. Imani paused, weighing her options. Call the police? They'd take 40 minutes to arrive if they came at all. Go back to her car? And do what? She pulled out her phone, opened the camera app, and started recording. Then she walked inside. The lobby was empty. The overhead lights flickered, a fixture that maintenance had been promising to fix for months. The elevator stood open, waiting. Imani took the stairs. The fourth-floor hallway was quiet. Too quiet. Usually at this hour, she could hear televisions through thin walls, children playing, neighbors cooking dinner. Tonight, nothing. Her door was closed. Locked. She checked the frame for signs of forced entry. Nothing visible. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was dark. She reached for the light switch. Don't! A man's voice, coming from her living room. Imani's hand stopped an inch from the switch. Who are you? Someone who'd prefer not to be seen. The voice was calm, educated, with a faint southern drawl. Please, close the door. We need to talk. Imani weighed her options. Running was possible, back down the stairs, out to the street. But if this person wanted to hurt her, they'd had ample opportunity. The fact that they were talking suggested a different agenda. She closed the door. Lights stay off? If you don't mind. She moved into the living room, guided by the faint glow from streetlights through the blinds. A shape sat in her reading chair. Male, average build, face obscured by shadows. I'm recording this conversation, she said. I assumed as much. I'd be disappointed if you weren't. The shape leaned forward slightly. Ms. Presswood, I represent interests that have been watching your case with considerable attention. Not the interests you've been fighting, different interests. That's not very specific. No, it isn't. And I apologize for the cloak and dagger presentation. But the people I work with have found that direct communication tends to attract unwanted attention. Who do you work with? Let's say people who want the same things you want. Accountability, transparency, justice. The shape paused. People who've been gathering evidence of judicial corruption in this state for a very long time. Evidence that goes far beyond Roland Beckham. Imani's heart rate increased. What kind of evidence? Campaign finance violations. Coordinated rulings for favored defendants. A network of judges, prosecutors, and political figures who have been working together to protect certain business interests, including, he paused deliberately, Galloway Property Management and its associated entities. If you have this evidence, why haven't you released it? Because evidence requires context. A recording here, a financial statement there, they're pieces of a puzzle. Without someone to put the puzzle together, to explain what it means and why it matters, the evidence just becomes noise. The shape leaned back. You're very good at explaining things, Ms. Presswood. Your motion to recuse, your statements to the media, the way you connected Beckham's campaign contributions to his rulings. You took complicated information and made it simple enough for anyone to understand. You want me to do that for your evidence. I want you to consider it. Not now. Not immediately. But when the time is right. The shape stood. My employers will be in touch, through channels that can't be monitored. If you're interested in seeing how deep this goes, really seeing, you'll know how to respond. He moved toward the door. Wait. Imani stepped forward. Gerald Whitmore, the lawyer who filed the sealed cases, was he working with your people? The shape paused. Gerald Whitmore was a good man who got too close to the truth without proper protection. What happened to him was a tragedy, and a warning. He opened the door. Be careful, Ms. Presswood. The people you're fighting have been doing this for a long time. They know how to make problems disappear. Is that a threat? It's the opposite of a threat. It's advice from someone who doesn't want to see you end up like Gerald Whitmore. The door opened wider. Good night, Ms. Presswood. We'll be in touch. He was gone before she could respond. Imani stood in the darkness for a long time, phone still recording. Then she turned on the lights, checked every room, locked every window, and began writing down everything she could remember about the conversation. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than Beckham, bigger than Galloway, bigger than anything she'd imagined when she'd rented this apartment 14 months ago, and she was right in the middle of it. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of depositions, document reviews, and legal strategy sessions. Wesley deposed Trent Galloway, who sweated through 3 hours of questioning about his inspection practices. The body cam footage was entered into evidence with full authentication. 6 tenant witnesses provided sworn statements describing years of discriminatory treatment. Miranda Voss fought every motion, objected to every document, challenged every witness. But without Beckham to sustain her objections, her tactics had less impact. Judge Delacroix was methodical, fair, and, most importantly, impartial. The pattern or practice hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in late October. The night before, Imani received an email from unknown. Subject: tomorrow. The attached file contains evidence that may be relevant to your case. Use it wisely. No signature. No return address. The email server showed a routing path through 6 different countries. The attachment was a PDF, 12 pages. Imani opened it and began reading. Financial records, wire transfers, bank statements showing payments from Galloway Property Management to a shell company called Fairview Consulting LLC. Payments from Fairview Consulting to Citizens for Fair Courts PAC. Payments from Citizens for Fair Courts to various political campaigns, including Roland Beckham's. A money trail, showing exactly how Galloway Property Management had funneled funds to the judge who ruled in their favor. There was more. Internal emails from Galloway Property Management discussing the Beckham arrangement, references to friendly rulings and expedited dispositions, a note about a meeting with LS, presumably Lorraine Sheffy, to discuss ongoing cooperation. Evidence that Gerald Whitmore would have died for. Evidence that someone, the mysterious visitor, his unseen employers, had just handed to her for free. Imani read it 3 times, checking every detail. Then she called Wesley. "I need you to come over, now. There's something you need to see." Wesley arrived at midnight, bleary-eyed but alert. He read the documents in silence, his face growing paler with each page. "Where did you get these?" "Anonymous source. The email was untraceable." "Imani, we can't use anonymous documents in court. Chain of custody, authentication. If we can't prove where these came from, we don't have to use them in court, not directly." Imani pulled up her laptop. "But we can use them to tell us where to look. The bank accounts are real. The shell companies are real. The wire transfers can be verified through subpoena." "Subpoenas take time. The hearing is tomorrow." "The hearing is about pattern or practice evidence, about whether Galloway Property Management systematically discriminated against black tenants." She tapped the screen. "These documents prove something else. They prove Galloway was paying for judicial protection. That's not evidence for tomorrow's hearing. That's evidence for a federal investigation." Wesley stared at her. "You want to send this to the DOJ?" "I want to send it everywhere. DOJ, State Attorney General, FBI, every agency that has jurisdiction over public corruption and civil rights violations." She met his eyes. "Beckham resigned, Wesley. That was supposed to be the end. A quiet exit, pension intact, no accountability. But this," she gestured at the documents, "this proves he was part of something bigger, a network, an arrangement, and the people who built that network are still out there, still operating, still making sure people like Dina Morse lose their homes while people like Lorraine Sheffy get richer." Wesley was quiet for a long moment. "If you send this, you're painting an even bigger target on your back. The people who killed Gerald Whitmore, we don't know they killed him. The people who may have killed Gerald Whitmore, the people who definitely broke into his office and stole his files, the people who've been watching your apartment for weeks." Wesley's voice tightened. "You're asking them to come after you." "They're already coming after me. The only question is whether I wait for them or force them into the open." Imani closed the laptop. "I'm tired of waiting, Wesley. I've been waiting for 14 months, documenting, gathering evidence, playing by the rules while they break every rule in the book. And you know what I've learned?" "What?" "The rules only protect people who already have power. Everyone else has to make their own rules." She stood. "I'm sending the documents tonight, to everyone, and tomorrow, at the hearing, I'm going to make sure every reporter in that courtroom knows exactly what Galloway Property Management has been paying for." Wesley rubbed his eyes. "You know they'll say you manufactured them. Fabricated evidence. Forged documents." "Let them. The bank accounts are real. The wire transfers can be verified. If they claim forgery, they'll have to explain why forged documents happen to match real financial transactions." She smiled grimly. "They can't have it both ways, Wesley. Either the documents are fake and the transactions don't exist, in which case they have nothing to worry about, or the documents are real and they're all going to prison." Wesley looked at her for a long moment. "You know, when you first walked into my office, I thought you were just another tenant fighting an eviction." "I know. I had no idea who you were, what you were capable of." "I know that too." He shook his head slowly. "You're going to change everything, aren't you? This city, this system, all of it." Imani thought about Gerald Whitmore, dead at 67, about Dina Morse, forced to move after 8 years, about the 11 plaintiffs who had lost in Beckham's courtroom, their claims dismissed, their evidence ignored. "I'm going to try," she said. "That's all anyone can do." The pattern or practice hearing began at 9 a.m. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, activists, curious citizens who had followed the case through its various twists. Imani sat at the plaintiff's table with Wesley, watching Judge Delacroix review her notes. Miranda Voss was absent. In her place sat a middle-aged man Imani didn't recognize. Gray suit, receding hairline, the air of someone who'd been called in at the last minute to handle a disaster. "Counsel," Delacroix said, "I don't see Ms. Voss on today's appearance sheet." The gray-suited man stood. "Your Honor, my name is Harrison Ford, no relation, from Callaway & Associates. Ms. Voss has withdrawn from this matter due to a conflict of interest. I've been retained to represent Galloway Property Management going forward." Wesley and Imani exchanged glances. Miranda Voss, who had fought every motion with ferocious determination, had suddenly withdrawn. The same day Imani had distributed the anonymous documents to federal authorities. Coincidence? Not likely. "Very well," Delacroix said. "Mr. Ford, are you prepared to proceed?" "Your Honor, given the circumstances, the defense requests a continuance to allow new counsel adequate time to review the case file." "Denied. This hearing has been scheduled for 8 weeks. The defendant has had ample opportunity to prepare." Delacroix turned to Wesley. "Mr. Odom, please present your evidence." The hearing lasted 3 days. Wesley presented the statistical analysis first, the 14 cases in Beckham's courtroom, the 11 black plaintiffs who had lost, the 3 white plaintiffs who had won. He showed the code enforcement records, the inspection patterns, the citation disparities. He played the body cam footage, pausing at the moment when Trent Galloway said, "Beckham will handle it." The tenant witnesses testified one by one. Dina Morse described her eviction, 8 years as a perfect tenant, then suddenly noise complaints that no one could document. A young mother named Keisha Williams described being cited for a child's bicycle on the balcony, while her white neighbor's balcony was covered with furniture. An elderly man named Roosevelt Hayes described being told his lease wouldn't be renewed because of unauthorized guests, his grandchildren, who visited once a month. Each story was different. Each story was the same. Black tenants targeted, white tenants ignored. Rules enforced selectively, violations invented when necessary. Harrison Ford cross-examined vigorously, but his heart wasn't in it. He was a cleanup lawyer, brought in to manage a disaster, not to win a case. His questions were technical, procedural, designed to create an appeal record rather than to persuade. On the 3rd day, Imani took the stand. "Ms. Presswood," Wesley began, "please describe the circumstances of your tenancy at Maplewood Heights." She told the story, the apartment, the first visit from Trent Galloway, the demand for entry without notice, the eviction notice citing a lease clause that didn't exist. "And during this time," Wesley continued, "did you become aware of similar experiences among other tenants?" "Yes. I spoke with numerous residents who described the same pattern: surprise inspections, invented violations, eviction threats. All of the residents who described these experiences were black. None of the white residents I spoke with reported similar treatment." "Did you document these conversations?" "I documented everything." Imani looked directly at the judge. "Dates, times, names, specific statements. I kept copies of all notices, all correspondence, all official documents. I recorded conversations when legally permitted. I created a comprehensive record of exactly what was happening at Maplewood Heights." "Why?" The question hung in the air. "Because I knew no one would believe us otherwise." Imani's voice was steady. "Because when black tenants complain about discrimination, we're told we're exaggerating. We're told it's a misunderstanding. We're told to be patient, to follow the process, to trust the system. And when we do all of those things, when we document and file and wait, we still lose. Because the system wasn't designed to help us. It was designed to protect the people who are hurting us." Harrison Ford rose. "Objection. Argumentative. The witness is testifying to conclusions rather than facts." Delacroix considered this. "Sustained in part. Ms. Presswood, please confine your testimony to your direct observations and experiences. Imani nodded. I observed a pattern of selective enforcement targeting black tenants. I documented that pattern with specific evidence. I brought that evidence to this court. She paused. And I'm asking this court to do what the previous court refused to do, to look at the evidence and acknowledge what it shows. Closing arguments came on the afternoon of the third day. Wesley summarized the evidence methodically: the statistics, the testimony, the documents, the body cam footage. He cited the Fair Housing Act, the relevant case law, the established standards for proving discriminatory intent through pattern and practice evidence. Harrison Ford argued that the statistical disparities could be explained by factors other than race, that the tenant testimony was self-serving, that the body cam comment about Beckham was ambiguous and didn't prove coordination. Judge Delacroix listened to both arguments without expression. I'll take this matter under advisement, she said when they finished. The court will issue a written ruling within 30 days. 30 days. Another month of waiting. Imani gathered her papers and walked out of the courtroom. The reporters were waiting in the hallway. Ms. Presswood, do you have any comment on the documents that were released to federal authorities yesterday? What documents show a money trail between Galloway Property Management and Judge Beckham's campaign? Is it true that the FBI has opened an investigation? Imani stopped walking. I have no comment on ongoing investigations. What I will say is this. She looked directly at the cameras. For years, black tenants in this city have been telling anyone who would listen that the system is rigged against them. They've been ignored, dismissed, told they were imagining things. The evidence presented in this case proves they were right. And if that evidence leads to additional investigations, into judges, into politicians, into anyone who participated in rigging that system, then I hope those investigations follow the facts wherever they lead. She walked away before they could ask more questions. Wesley caught up with her at the elevator. That was good, he said. Clear, direct, impossible to misquote. It was the truth. Sometimes the truth is good politics. He pressed the elevator button. What now? Now we wait. 30 days for the ruling, however long for the federal investigations. She watched the numbers above the elevator doors. And I go back to Maplewood Heights, back to my apartment, back to pretending I'm just a tenant who got lucky. You think it's safe? I think the people who were watching me before have bigger problems now. The elevator arrived. But I'm not naive, Wesley. I know this isn't over. It won't be over for a long time. Then why go back? Imani stepped into the elevator. Because it's my home, and I don't run from my home. The doors closed. Joy. 3 weeks after the hearing, the ruling came. Imani was at work, the legal aid clinic, answering phones, filing documents, maintaining her cover, when Wesley called. We won. She stepped outside, phone pressed to her ear. Tell me everything. Delacroix found in our favor on all counts. Pattern or practice discrimination established. Galloway Property Management violated the Fair Housing Act through selective enforcement of lease terms and building codes. She ordered, paper rustled, rescission of all eviction notices based on the fraudulent Section 7.3.2, compensatory damages of $47,500, mandatory fair housing compliance training for all management staff within 90 days. Imani leaned against the building wall. What about punitive damages? Denied. She said there was insufficient evidence of malicious intent, that the discrimination, while systematic, appeared to be motivated by economic factors rather than racial animus. Wesley's voice carried a note of frustration. It's a partial victory, Imani. A good victory, but partial. $47,500. She'd spent more than $80,000 on legal fees. The math didn't work, but the math wasn't the point. What about the other tenants? Dina and the others? The ruling establishes a precedent. Any tenant who received a similar notice can use this case as evidence for their own claims. Dina's already talking to another lawyer about reopening her case. That's something. It's more than something. It's a crack in the wall. Wesley's voice warmed. You did this, Imani. You took on a rigged system and won. We won, and it's not over yet. The federal investigations? Those, and whatever comes next. She watched traffic pass on the street in front of her. Galloway is one company, Wesley. One property management firm in one city. There are thousands of others doing the same thing. Millions of tenants being treated the same way. This ruling is a start, not a finish. You sound like you have a plan. I always have a plan. She smiled slightly. I'll see you at the final hearing. We still have to collect that $47,000. I'll be there. She hung up and went back inside to finish her shift. The final hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, a formality to enter the judgment and establish the payment timeline. Imani arrived early, expecting a quiet proceeding. Instead, she found the courtroom packed. Reporters, activists, tenants from Maplewood Heights, including Dina Morse, who gave her a tearful hug in the hallway. A representative from the NAACP, a lawyer from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and in the back row, a face she recognized, Lorraine Sheffy. The councilwoman sat alone, watching the proceedings with an expression that revealed nothing. She didn't acknowledge Imani's gaze. Judge Delacroix entered and the room stood. Case 2024 CV 04471, Presswood v. Galloway Property Management. This hearing is to enter final judgment pursuant to the court's ruling of... The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. 2 men in dark suits walked in. They moved with the quiet confidence of people who expected doors to open for them. One of them handed a document to the bailiff. Delacroix paused. Counsel, approach. Wesley and Harrison Ford went to the bench. The bailiff handed Delacroix the document. She read it, her expression shifting from confusion to something harder. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, this hearing is temporarily recessed. I've received notification that the U.S. Department of Justice has filed a motion to intervene in this case as part of an ongoing federal investigation. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The motion cites evidence of potential civil rights violations extending beyond the scope of the current lawsuit. The federal government is requesting access to all discovery materials and testimony in this matter, as well as a stay of final judgment pending completion of their investigation. Wesley returned to the plaintiff's table, face pale. What does this mean? Imani whispered. It means the feds are taking over, or at least they want to expand this into something much bigger. He glanced at the men in dark suits. FBI, they've been watching the case. The documents I sent. Apparently they found something worth investigating. Delacroix continued. The court will grant the motion to intervene and the stay of final judgment. The plaintiff's compensatory award remains valid, but will not be dispersed until federal proceedings are concluded. She looked at Imani. Ms. Presswood, you may be contacted by federal investigators regarding your testimony and evidence. I advise you to cooperate fully. I will, Your Honor. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel fell. Cho. After the hearing, one of the FBI agents approached Imani in the hallway. Ms. Presswood, Special Agent Marcus Webb. He showed her his credentials. We'd like to speak with you about the documents you provided to the Department of Justice. Is there somewhere private we can talk? There's a conference room down the hall. They walked in silence. Agent Webb closed the door behind them. The documents you submitted, he said without preamble, show a clear pattern of illegal campaign contributions routed through shell companies to influence judicial decisions. We've verified the bank accounts and wire transfers. The evidence is solid. I'm glad to hear that. Where did you obtain these documents? Imani met his gaze. They were sent to me anonymously. I don't know who provided them. You expect me to believe that someone just handed you evidence of a massive corruption scheme out of the goodness of their heart? I expect you to investigate the evidence regardless of how I obtained it. The source doesn't change what the documents show. Agent Webb studied her for a long moment. Ms. Presswood, We've been investigating corruption in Georgia's housing courts for 2 years. We knew there was a network, judges, politicians, business interests working together, but we couldn't prove it. The evidence always disappeared. Witnesses always recanted. Cases always fell apart. I know. I spoke with Eleanor Whitmore. Webb's expression flickered. Gerald Whitmore was a good investigator, better than most of ours. He was close to cracking this thing open before he died. And now? Now we have what he spent years trying to find: documentary evidence, a money trail, witnesses who are willing to testify. Webb leaned forward. But we need more. We need someone who understands the system, who's been inside it, who can help us put the pieces together. What are you asking? I'm asking if you'd be willing to work with us, not as an informant, as a consultant, someone who can help us understand how these people operate, how they communicate, how they protect themselves. Imani thought about the visitor in her darkened apartment, the anonymous email, the network that was watching with considerable attention. There are other people already working on this, she said carefully. People who've been gathering evidence much longer than I have, people who prefer to stay in the shadows. Webb nodded slowly. We're aware of certain parallel investigations. We've had indirect contact with some of the parties involved. He paused. The question is whether you want to be part of the official effort or the unofficial one. Can't I be part of both? That's complicated. So is everything else about this situation. Imani stood. I'll cooperate with your investigation, Agent Webb. I'll provide testimony, documents, whatever you need. But I'm not going to cut ties with the people who helped me get this far. They have resources you don't. Reach you don't. And frankly, I trust their motives more than I trust the government's. That's cynical. That's experience. She moved toward the door. Call me when you're ready to take my statement. I'll be available. She walked out before he could respond. The federal investigation expanded over the following months. Roland Beckham was called before a grand jury. Lorraine Sheffy resigned her counsel seat, citing personal reasons. Trent Galloway sold Maplewood Heights to a new owner, a company called Fairfield Holdings, whose beneficial owners were buried under layers of corporate structure. Imani did her own research on Fairfield Holdings. The trail led eventually to a familiar name: Councilwoman Sheffy's husband, operating through intermediaries. She documented the connection and sent it to Agent Webb. The following week, FBI agents raided Fairfield Holdings offices. 8 months after the original ruling, the federal investigation concluded its first phase. Roland Beckham pleaded guilty to 1 count of honest services fraud and 1 count of making false statements to federal investigators. His sentence: 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, and permanent disbarment. Lorraine Sheffy was indicted on charges of bribery and conspiracy to commit civil rights violations. Her trial was scheduled for the following year. She was released on $2 million bail. Trent Galloway cooperated with investigators in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony implicated 3 other property management companies and 2 additional judges. Miranda Voss was suspended from the bar pending investigation into her knowledge of the bribery scheme. Felix Drummond was never charged with anything. The compensatory award in Imani's case was finally dispersed. $47,500, minus legal fees, deposited into her account on a gray Tuesday morning in November. She donated the entire amount to Eleanor Whitmore, in memory of her husband. The night after Beckham's sentencing, Imani sat in her apartment at Maplewood Heights, watching the news coverage on mute. Her phone buzzed, an email from an unknown sender. Subject: well done. The first phase is complete. There is much more work to do. When you're ready for phase 2, you know how to reach us. Friends. She read it 3 times. Then she deleted it and went to bed. The following morning, she received another email. This one had a return address: This one had a subject line. From lsheffy@gmail.com. Subject? No subject. You shouldn't have done that. Beckham was the small one. L. Imani stared at the words for a long time. Beckham was the small one, meaning there were bigger fish, meaning the network extended beyond one corrupt judge and one disgraced councilwoman, meaning everything she'd accomplished was just the beginning. She saved the email to her evidence folder. Then she got dressed, went to the legal aid clinic, and started her shift. A week later, Dina Morse called. "Imani," her voice was shaking. "Someone broke into my new apartment." "What?" "Last night. I came home and the door was open. They didn't take anything valuable, just papers, legal papers, the files from my case against Galloway." Imani felt her blood run cold. "Did you call the police?" "They took a report, said it was probably random, kids looking for quick cash." Dina laughed bitterly. "But they took my files, Imani. Only my files. My TV is still there, my laptop, everything except the documents. The same pattern, the same playbook." "Dina, do you have backups, cloud storage, copies anywhere?" "You told me to make copies. I did. Everything saved to a Google Drive." Dina's voice steadied slightly. "They can take the paper, but they can't take what's online." "Good. That's good." Imani's mind was racing. "Listen to me. Don't go back to your apartment tonight. Stay with family, friends, anywhere else. I'll call Agent Webb. Get federal protection if we can." "Federal protection? Imani, what's happening?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." She hung up and called Wesley. They hit Dina's apartment, stole her case files. Same pattern as Gerald Whitmore. Wesley was silent for a moment. "They're cleaning house again." "Or sending a message. Either way, we need to move fast." She grabbed her keys. "Meet me at the FBI field office in an hour. We need to tell Webb that whatever he's investigating is still active." "Imani, be careful." "I'm always careful. That's why I'm still here." She hung up and headed for the door. Chete. The parking lot was empty except for her Civic and a single black sedan parked in the far corner. Engine off, lights off, someone sitting in the driver's seat. Imani stopped at her car, keys in hand, watching the sedan. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the sedan's door opened, and Lorraine Sheffy stepped out. She looked different than she had in her official photos. Older, thinner, the careful elegance replaced by something raw. She walked toward Imani with slow, deliberate steps. "Ms. Presswood." Her voice was steady, controlled. "I believe we have unfinished business." Imani didn't move. "You're out on bail, councilwoman. I don't think you're supposed to be approaching witnesses in your case." "I'm not approaching a witness. I'm approaching a woman who destroyed my career, my reputation, and my family's future." Sheffy stopped 10 feet away. "I wanted to see you face to face, to understand what kind of person does what you did. I documented corruption. The system did the rest." "The system?" Sheffy laughed. "You think you understand the system? You think your little lawsuit and your little investigation changed anything?" She stepped closer. "I've been part of this system for 30 years. I know every judge, every prosecutor, every politician who matters. I know where the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively. You took down Beckham, you took down me. But the system remains, and the people who really run it, you haven't touched them." "Then tell me who they are." Sheffy smiled coldly. "You're clever, I'll give you that. But you're also naive. You think you can burn down a building by starting a fire in one room. You don't understand how these structures work, how they protect themselves, how they regenerate." "Then help me understand." For a moment, something flickered in Sheffy's eyes, something that might have been regret, or calculation, or both. "There's a file," she said quietly. "Not in any official system, not in any investigation. A file that was started 20 years ago by people who wanted to document exactly how this city really operates. Names, dates, transactions, everything you'd need to bring the whole thing down. Where is it? Hidden. Protected by people who think they can control what happens with it. Sheffy's voice dropped even lower. But nothing stays hidden forever. And the people who have it? They're not as careful as they used to be. Are you offering to help me find it? Sheffy's smile returned, bitter, broken. I'm offering you a choice. Walk away now while you still can. Take your victory. Enjoy your $47,000. Live your life. She paused. Or keep digging, keep pushing, and see what happens when you finally reach the bottom. What happens? Ask Gerald Whitmore. Oh, wait. The smile twisted. You can't. She turned and walked back to her sedan. Councilwoman, Imani called after her. What's in those two sealed cases? 0892 and 1104? Sheffy paused with her hand on the car door. The beginning, she said. The very beginning. Before Beckham. Before me. Before any of us. She opened the door. Find those files, Ms. Presswood. If you really want to understand what you're fighting, find those files. She got in the car and drove away. Imani stood in the parking lot for a long time, watching the sedan disappear into traffic. Then she got in her Civic and drove to the FBI field office. The investigation continued. Agent Webb took her statement about Dina's break-in. Federal marshals were assigned to provide security for key witnesses. The Justice Department announced a civil rights review of housing court practices across the state. But the two sealed cases remained sealed. Every FOIA request was denied. Every appeal was rejected. Whatever was in those files, someone was very determined to keep it hidden. 6 months later, Lorraine Sheffy went to trial. She was convicted on 3 counts of bribery and 1 count of conspiracy. Sentence: 4 years in federal prison. At the sentencing hearing, she looked at Imani, seated in the gallery, watching, documenting, and said nothing. But her eyes said everything. This isn't over. The night after Sheffy's sentencing, Imani came home to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of a court document. Case 2021 CV 0892, previously sealed, now, somehow, in her hands. The plaintiff's name, Margaret Delacroix. The defendant, Galloway Property Management. The presiding judge, a name Imani didn't recognize. The case had been dismissed. The plaintiff had died 6 months later. Margaret Delacroix, the same surname as Judge Anita Delacroix, who had reopened Imani's case, who had ruled in her favor, who had helped bring Beckham and Sheffy to justice. Imani read the document 3 more times. Then she sat down at her computer and began researching Margaret Delacroix. The answer came within minutes. Margaret Delacroix was Judge Anita Delacroix's mother. She had sued Galloway Property Management in 2021, claiming housing discrimination. Her case had been dismissed by a judge who retired 6 months later. She had died the following year, officially of natural causes. Anita Delacroix had become a judge 3 years ago, and she had just ruled against the same company that had destroyed her mother. The implications spiraled through Imani's mind. Had Delacroix known? Had she recused herself and kept it secret? Or had she used her position to finally get justice for her mother? Justice that the system had denied. Either way, the ruling was compromised. The appeal would be automatic once this came out. Everything Imani had won could be overturned, unless she did nothing. Unless she kept this document secret, let the ruling stand, let the federal investigation continue without this complication. She could do that. No one would ever know. But she would know. Imani sat in her apartment, holding the paper, weighing the choice. Justice. Real justice. What did it actually look like? She thought about Gerald Whitmore, dead at 67. About Dina Morse, forced from her home. About the 11 plaintiffs who had lost in Beckham's courtroom. About Margaret Delacroix, who had fought the same fight and lost. She thought about what she had said in the courtroom months ago. The rules only protect people who already have power. Everyone else has to make their own rules. Had Anita Delacroix made her own rules? And if she had, was that wrong? Imani didn't have an answer. She folded the paper and put it in her safe, next to the recording of Beckham and the evidence from the anonymous source. Some truths needed to wait, some questions didn't have easy answers, and some justice, maybe, was better than none. The next morning, Imani went to work. The legal aid clinic was quiet. She filed documents, answered phones, helped people navigate a system that had never been designed to help them. At noon, she took her lunch break on a bench outside the courthouse. A woman sat down beside her. Ms. Presswood, Judge Anita Delacroix, was out of her robes, wearing a simple gray suit. She looked exhausted. "I believe you received a delivery last night." Imani said nothing. "I'm not going to ask how you got it. I'm not going to ask what you intend to do with it." Delacroix stared straight ahead. "I'm only going to tell you one thing." "What's that?" "My mother spent the last year of her life believing that no one would ever know what happened to her. That the people who discriminated against her, who drove her from her home, would never face any consequences." Delacroix's voice was steady, controlled. She was wrong. They faced consequences, not through her case, that was stolen from her, but through yours. She turned to look at Imani. "I should have recused myself. I knew that. But I also knew that if I did, the case would go to Judge Patterson or Judge Morrison, both of whom have the same financial connections Beckham had, the same political patrons, the same incentives to rule against you. So you stayed. I stayed. And I ruled on the evidence, fairly, accurately, the way any honest judge would have ruled." Her eyes were bright with something. Anger? Grief? Determination? "You can destroy me with that document, Ms. Presswood. You can file a complaint with the JQC, get my ruling overturned, start the whole process over again. Or, Delacroix stood. Or you can decide that sometimes justice comes from unexpected places, and that the people who deliver it aren't always perfect." She walked away without waiting for a response. Imani sat on the bench for a long time, watching the courthouse doors open and close. People going in, people coming out, each one carrying their own burdens, their own hopes, their own compromises with a system that was never designed for them. She made her decision. She went back to work. The document stayed in her safe. The ruling stood. The federal investigation continued. And Imani Presswood went on living her life. The visible life, the tenant and clinic worker and community organizer. The invisible life, the investor and strategist and gatherer of truths. Some nights, she checked her email for messages from the anonymous allies who had helped her. Sometimes they came. Sometimes they didn't. Some nights, she looked out her window at the parking lot and saw nothing but empty spaces. Some nights, she saw cars that shouldn't be there. Watching. Waiting. She documented everything. The fight wasn't over. It would never be over. The system was too big, too entrenched, too protected by people who benefited from its failures. But cracks had appeared. Light was getting through. And somewhere, in a file that was supposed to stay hidden forever, there were names and dates and transactions that would bring the whole thing down. Imani didn't know when that file would surface. She didn't know if she would be the one to find it. But she knew one thing. She would be ready. The last night of this chapter, because it was a chapter, not an ending, Imani received one final email. From Unknown. Subject: Phase 2. The file exists. We know where it is. When you're ready to move, respond to this address with 2 words. I'm ready. The work continues. Friends. Imani read the email 3 times. Then she began typing her response. Imani Presswood's story is a powerful testament that justice is never freely given. It must be claimed through persistence, strategy, and extraordinary courage. In a system where power and money can corrupt even those who hold the scales of justice, the vulnerable are often abandoned, their voices silenced by convoluted procedures and biased rulings. The first and most important lesson: document everything. Imani did not win through empty words or emotions. She won through undeniable evidence. Every call recorded, every document preserved, every pattern of discrimination meticulously noted. In the fight against injustice, documented truth is the most powerful weapon. The second lesson: legal knowledge is power. When Imani cited exact statutes and codes, those who abused their authority had to retreat. Ignorance makes people victims. Knowledge transforms them into warriors. The third lesson: real justice is always incomplete. Beckham received only 18 months in prison. Many accomplices walked free. 3 victim families never received compensation. This is reality. Changing systems is a marathon, not a sprint. The fourth lesson: allies come from unexpected places. From anonymous sources providing crucial documents to a judge seeking justice for her own mother, Imani's victory came through networks she never anticipated. No one fights alone. Finally, this story reminds us that one person can create change. Imani began as an ordinary tenant, but her determination shook an entire corruption network. Sometimes, one person standing up is enough to light the path for millions of others. The work continues.